The Cessna 172's engine coughs once, then falls silent. Below, endless rows of corn stretch toward the horizon like a green ocean. And somewhere in that vast expanse, a pilot's final transmission crackles through static. Mayday, mayday, ... Engine failure, ... going down, ... Then nothing but the whisper of wind through stalks. 18 years earlier, ... The morning of September 10th, 1982, dawns crisp and clear over Millfield Regional Airport. Dew clings to the wingtips of small aircraft lined up like sleeping birds. Along the tarmac, inside the modest terminal building, coffee percolates in a glass pot while early risers check weather reports and file flight plans. David Kessler stands at the counter, his pilot's logbook open before him. At 28, he carries himself with the quiet confidence of someone who's found his calling. His dark hair is neatly combed, and his blue eyes scan the paperwork with practiced efficiency. The counter clerk, Martha Reynolds, has watched him perform this ritual dozens of times over the past 3 years. Solo flight to Chicago again? Martha asks, rubber stamping his flight plan with the mechanical precision of routine. Business meeting, David replies, though something in his voice carries an edge Martha hasn't heard before. His fingers drum against the counter, a nervous habit she's never noticed. Should be back by sunset. Martha glances at the meteorological report spread across her desk. Weather looks good all the way to O'Hare. Winds are calm, visibility unlimited. She pauses, studying his face. You feeling all right, David? You seem a little ... just tired. He forces a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Long night. Outside, the Cessna 172 with tail number N7834X sits fueled and ready. David purchased the aircraft 6 months ago with money he'd saved from his job at the local bank. Flying has become more than a hobby, it's his escape, his sanctuary above the complexities of ground-level life. As he conducts his pre-flight inspection, David's movements are methodical but rushed. He checks the oil, tests the control surfaces, examines the propeller for nicks. Everything appears normal, yet his hands shake slightly as he signs the aircraft logbook. Beautiful morning for flying. David turns to find Tom Brennan approaching, a fellow pilot and the closest thing to a friend he has at the airport. Tom's weathered face shows concern as he notices David's distracted demeanor. Yeah, perfect conditions, David agrees, though his voice lacks conviction. You sure you're up for this today? You look like you've seen a ghost. David's jaw tightens. I'm fine, Tom. Just need to get this trip behind me. Tom studies him for a moment longer, then nods. Safe flight, buddy. See you tonight. At 9:47 a.m., David climbs into the cockpit and begins his engine start checklist. The Continental 0320 engine turns over smoothly, settling into a steady idle. He contacts ground control, receives taxi clearance, and guides the aircraft toward runway 27. The control tower clears him for takeoff at 10:03 a.m. David advances the throttle, and the Cessna accelerates down the asphalt. At rotation speed, he pulls back gently on the yoke, and the aircraft lifts off into the morning sky. From the ground, Tom watches the white and blue aircraft climb steadily northward until it disappears into the haze. He'll replay this moment countless times in the years to come, searching for any sign he might have missed. At 10:47 a.m., while cruising at 3,500 feet over rural farmland, David makes his first position report to Chicago Approach Control. His voice sounds normal, professional. Chicago Approach, Cessna 7834X, 40 miles south of O'Hare, level at 3,500. Cessna 34X, Chicago Approach, radar contact. Continue present heading, descend and maintain 2,500. Down to 2,500, 34X. Those are the last words anyone hears from David Kessler. At 11:15 a.m., Chicago Approach notices the aircraft's transponder signal has vanished from their radar scope. They attempt radio contact repeatedly, but receive no response. Emergency protocols. Activate immediately. The search begins within hours. Civil Air Patrol aircraft crisscross the flight path, scanning fields and forests for any sign of wreckage. State police coordinate ground teams, while local news stations broadcast appeals for information. David's planned route takes him over some of the most densely farmed land in Illinois, thousands of acres of corn and soybeans, broken only by occasional farmhouses and country roads. By evening, as the sun sets over Millfield Regional Airport, David's aircraft remains missing. Martha Reynolds stands at the terminal window, watching the empty sky and wondering what happened to the young pilot, who seemed so troubled that morning. The initial search covers a 20-mile radius along David's flight path. Helicopters hover low over cornfields while ground crews walk grid patterns through the tall stalks. After 72 hours, the official search radius expands to 50 miles. After a week, it encompasses 3 counties, but the Illinois farmland keeps its secrets. The corn grows thick and tall, creating a natural canopy that could hide a small aircraft for decades. As autumn arrives and the search continues, investigators begin to suspect they may never find David Kessler or his Cessna 172. The search for David Kessler enters its second week with no trace of the missing aircraft. FBI agent Sarah Chun arrives at Millfield Regional Airport on a gray October morning, her breath visible in the cooling air. At 34, she's built a reputation for solving cases others have given up on, but missing aircraft present unique challenges. Martha Reynolds meets her at the terminal, clutching a steaming cup of coffee like a lifeline. The past 2 weeks have aged the clerk visibly dark circles under her eyes, hands that tremble slightly when she thinks no one's looking. He seemed different that morning, Martha repeats for what must be the 100th time. Nervous. Not like himself at all. Agent Chun makes notes in her leather portfolio. Different how specifically? Usually David was so calm, so methodical. That morning he was rushing, distracted, and his hands. Martha demonstrates, fingers drumming against the counter. He kept doing this. Did he mention anything unusual? Any problems? Martha hesitates, then shakes her head. Just said he'd had a long night. Business meeting in Chicago was all he told me about the flight. Tom Brennan joins them, having overheard the conversation. His face carries the weight of someone who's been asking himself the same questions for days. I should have pushed harder, he says quietly. Should have asked more questions. You couldn't have known, Agent Chun replies, though she makes a note about his observation. Tell me about David's financial situation. Any debts, gambling problems, anything that might have been weighing on him? Tom and Martha exchange glances. He worked at First National Bank, Tom offers. Seemed to do well enough. Bought that Cessna 6 months ago, paid cash from what I heard. Cash for an aircraft? Chun's eyebrows rise. Even a used Cessna 172 represents a significant investment. That's unusual for someone his age. He was always careful with money, Martha adds. Never flashy, never spent foolishly. But buying that plane ... It was like he'd found something worth spending on. Agent Chun walks out to the tarmac where David's usual parking spot sits empty. The October wind carries the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. She studies the flight path chart, tracing the route with her finger. Chicago approach lost radar contact somewhere over Whitman County prime agricultural land with farms stretching for miles in every direction. Her phone rings. Detective Ray Morrison from the Illinois State Police, his voice tight with exhaustion. Sarah, we've got something, maybe. What kind of something? Farmer named Bill Kowalski called in about an hour ago. Says he heard a plane in distress that morning, flying low over his property. Engine sputtering, then silence. Chun feels her pulse quicken. Why didn't he report it earlier? Been out of state visiting his sister. Just got back yesterday and heard about the search on the radio. Says, the plane sounded like it was in trouble, but he was busy with harvest and didn't think much of it until now. Within an hour, Chun stands in Bill Kowalski's farmyard, a sprawling operation that encompasses nearly 800 acres of corn and soybeans. Kowalski is a weathered man in his 60s, with calloused hands and the deliberate manner of someone who measures words carefully. Was about 11 in the morning, he explains, pointing toward the eastern section of his property where the corn stands nearly 10 feet tall. I was working on the combine when I heard this engine sound not right. You know? Rough, like it was missing. How low was the aircraft flying? Low enough that I looked up, but the corn was too tall to see it clearly. Just caught a glimpse of something white and blue through the stalks. He pauses, his expression troubled. Then the engine quit completely, just stopped. Chun surveys the vast expanse of corn. The search teams have covered this area, but the dense vegetation makes spotting a small aircraft nearly impossible from the air. You didn't hear a crash? That's the thing, Kowalski says slowly. I was expecting to hear something, a bang, a thud, breaking branches. But there was nothing, just silence. Could the pilot have restarted the engine? Maybe, but I never heard it again, and I was listening for it the rest of the day. Chun coordinates with the search teams to focus their efforts on Kowalski's property. Ground crews equipped with metal detectors begin methodical sweeps through the corn rows. The work is backbreaking, pushing through dense stalks while scanning for any trace of wreckage. By late afternoon, the search teams have covered 50 acres without finding so much as a piece of aluminum. The corn creates a maze of green corridors, each row looking identical to the last. Chun realizes that a small aircraft could easily be hidden just yards away from searchers without being detected. As evening approaches, she receives another call from Detective Morrison. Sarah, you need to get back to town. We've been looking into David Kessler's background, and there's something you should know. An hour later, Chun sits in the state police station reviewing a file that changes everything she thought she knew about the missing pilot. Bank records show that David Kessler had been systematically embezzling money from First National Bank for nearly a year, small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums totaling over $200,000. The bank's internal audit discovered the theft 3 days ago, Morrison explains. They were planning to confront him on Monday morning. Kessler would have known the investigation was closing in. Chun studies the timeline. David's nervous behavior at the airport, his mention of a long night, the mysterious cash purchase of the aircraft. Suddenly everything takes on a different meaning. So he wasn't flying to a business meeting in Chicago. Looks like he was running, but the revelation raises new questions. If David was fleeing with stolen money, where was he really going? Chicago has no extradition treaties with other countries, but it's a major international airport with flights to anywhere in the world. Was the engine failure genuine, or was it part of an elaborate plan to fake his death and disappear? As night falls over the Illinois farmland, Chun stares out at the endless rows of corn swaying in the darkness. Somewhere in that green maze lies the answer to what happened to David Kessler. But 18 years will pass before that answer finally comes to light. The investigation into David Kessler's disappearance takes on new urgency as FBI forensic accountants dissect his financial records. Agent Chun sits in the sterile conference room at First National Bank, surrounded by boxes of documents that paint a picture of methodical theft and careful planning. Bank President Harold Morrison, no relation to Detective Morrison, shifts uncomfortably in his chair. At 58, he's managed this institution for over 2 decades without a major scandal. The discovery of the embezzlement has shaken him visibly. David had access to dormant accounts, Morrison explains, his voice barely above a whisper. Customers who hadn't made transactions in years. He would transfer small amounts, $50 here, $100 there. Nothing that would trigger our standard audit protocols. Chun examines the transfer records. But 200,000 isn't small amounts anymore. What changed? 6 months ago, the transfers became larger and more frequent. Almost like he was working toward a deadline. Morrison pauses, running his hand through thinning gray hair. The same time he bought that airplane. The forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa Park, slides another document across the table. Here's what's interesting. 3 days before his disappearance, Kessler accessed the bank's main vault. Security footage shows him staying late, alone. Chun studies the grainy surveillance image. David appears calm, methodical, carrying a small briefcase. What was he doing? We're still reconciling the vault inventory, but preliminary counts suggest he may have taken additional cash, possibly another 50,000 or more. The implications hit Chun immediately. So he could have had $250,000 with him on that plane. If he really crashed, Detective Morrison interjects, entering the conference room with fresh coffee and a grim expression. We've had the search teams working Kowalski's farm for 3 days. Nothing, not a single piece of debris. Chun has been wrestling with the same doubt. Modern aircraft leave traces when they crash: scattered metal, disturbed earth, fuel stains. The absence of any physical evidence is becoming increasingly suspicious. There's something else, Detective. Morrison continues. We ran Kessler's credit cards and bank accounts. No activity since the day he disappeared, but we found something interesting in his apartment. An hour later, Chun stands in David's modest one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. The space is neat, almost obsessively organized, but it feels hollow somehow, like a stage set rather than a home. Detective Morrison leads her to the bedroom closet. Look at this. He slides hangers aside to reveal a gap in the clothing. His landlord says David always kept his clothes pressed and organized. But there are clear spaces here where items are missing. Chun examines the empty hangers, the gaps in the shoe rack. Someone packed deliberately, not hastily, gets better. Morrison opens the dresser drawers. Underwear, socks, basic clothing, all missing specific items. Like someone selected enough for a long trip, but left enough behind to make it look normal. In the bathroom, Chun finds another telling detail. The medicine cabinet contains a prescription bottle for blood pressure medication, half empty, prescribed. Just 2 weeks before David's disappearance. He took his medication with him. Man planning to crash his plane doesn't worry about his blood pressure, Morrison observes. But the most damning evidence sits on the kitchen table, a travel guide to South America, specifically highlighting countries with no extradition treaties to the United States. Several pages are bookmarked, and margin notes are written in David's careful handwriting. Chen photographs the book, her mind racing. The pattern is becoming clear. David Kessler had been planning his disappearance for months. The embezzlement provided the funds, the aircraft provided the means, and the engine failure story provided the cover. Yet doubt nags at her. If David staged his own disappearance, where is the plane? Even if he landed safely somewhere else, the aircraft would need to be hidden or destroyed. And his radio transmission to Chicago approach had sounded genuinely distressed. Her phone buzzes with a text from the search coordinator. Found something. Kowalski Farm, northeast section. 20 minutes later, Chun stands at the edge of a harvested cornfield where the search team has uncovered their first concrete clue. Half buried in the soft earth lies a piece of aircraft aluminum, roughly 2 feet square, twisted and scorched. Definitely from a small aircraft, the team leader confirms. And look at this. He points to barely visible numbers etched into the metal, 34X. Chun's pulse quickens. N7834X, David Kessler's tail number. How deep was it buried? About 18 inches. Could have been thrown here by impact, then covered by years of farming activity. But as Chun examines the debris more closely, something bothers her. The piece shows impact damage but lacks the deep scarring she'd expect from a high-speed crash. The scorch marks are superficial, more like fire damage than explosion trauma. "This doesn't look right," she murmurs, turning the aluminum fragment in her hands. The search team expands their grid around the discovery site. Over the next several hours, they uncover more debris, small pieces of aircraft skin, fragments of plastic, and what appears to be part of a seat cushion. But the pattern of distribution is wrong. Instead of a concentrated crash site with debris scattered by impact energy, the pieces seem randomly scattered across several acres. As the sun sets on the third day of intensive searching, Chun faces a troubling possibility. The debris field suggests an aircraft broke apart, but not from a catastrophic crash. The scorch marks and scattered distribution pattern look more consistent with deliberate destruction, as if someone had tried to create the appearance of a crash without the crash itself. Standing in the growing darkness of the Illinois farmland, surrounded by the evidence of what might be an elaborate deception, Chun realizes the David Kessler case is far more complex than anyone imagined. Either he died in a genuinely tragic accident, or he orchestrated one of the most sophisticated disappearances she's ever encountered. But 18 years later, when a farmer's plow strikes something metallic buried deep in his cornfield, the truth will prove stranger than either possibility she's considering tonight. The case file for David Kessler has grown thick with false leads and dead ends over the past 18 years. Agent Sarah Chun, now 52 and carrying the weight of dozens of unsolved cases, keeps it in the bottom drawer of her desk, a reminder of the ones that got away. The official conclusion, reached after 6 months of investigation, classified David Kessler's disappearance as death by aircraft accident, with probable cause being staged disappearance and insurance fraud. The scattered debris found in Kowalski's cornfield was determined to be planted evidence, designed to throw investigators off the trail while David escaped to South America with the stolen money. But Chun never quite believed it. The discrepancies that bothered her in 1982 still nag at her nearly 2 decades later. The debris pattern was wrong for planted evidence, too random, too widely scattered. The scorch marks on the aluminum fragments showed genuine heat stress, not the superficial burning someone might create to fake a crash. And most troubling of all, no one ever found David Kessler living under a new identity anywhere in the world. The FBI's International Fugitive Task Force periodically receives tips about sightings in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, countries highlighted in that South America travel guide found in David's apartment. Each lid is investigated and eliminated. Bank records show no access to offshore accounts. Facial recognition software scanning immigration databases comes up empty. It's as if David Kessler simply vanished from existence. On this crisp September morning, exactly 18 years after David's disappearance, Chun sits across from Bill Kowalski in his farmhouse kitchen. The old farmer has aged considerably, his hair now completely white, his movements slower, but his memory remains sharp. "Never did sit right with me," Kowalski says, stirring sugar into his coffee. "All that talk about him faking his death. I heard that plane, Agent Chun. I heard it struggling, heard it quit. That weren't no fake emergency. You're certain the engine stopped completely? Dead certain. Been around aircraft engines my whole life, served as a mechanic in Korea. When they quit, you know it." He pauses, staring out the window at his fields. "Always wondered if maybe we just looked in the wrong place." Chun follows his gaze across the vast expanse of farmland. Over the years, Kowalski has expanded his operation, purchasing adjacent properties as neighboring farmers retired. What was once 800 acres is now over 1,500 endless rows of corn and soybeans stretching to the horizon. "You've had the field searched multiple times," Chun reminds him. "Sure, but think about it. 18 years of farming, plowing, disking, planting. If something was buried shallow, my equipment would have hit it by now. But if it went deep, ... He trails off, the implication hanging in the air. Chun considers this. Agricultural machinery works the top 12 to 18 inches of soil. But if an aircraft had somehow buried itself deeper, perhaps, in soft ground after heavy rains, it could remain hidden indefinitely. Her phone rings, interrupting her thoughts. Detective Morrison's son, Jake, has taken over his father's position with the state police. Ray Morrison retired 5 years ago, taking with him the institutional knowledge of the original investigation. Agent Chun, Jake Morrison here. We just got an interesting call from the Cook County Medical Examiner's office. They've got a John Doe from 1983 they think might be connected to your missing pilot case. Chun's pulse quickens. What kind of connection? Body. Was found in Lake Michigan, near Chicago. Male, late 20s, been in the water for months when they pulled him out. No identification, but they found something interesting in his jacket pocket, a business card from First National Bank in Millfield. That could be anyone who did business with the bank. Maybe, but get this, the jacket had a pilot's wings pin on the lapel. And the body showed injuries consistent with aircraft impact trauma. Chun feels the familiar tingle of a case breaking open. I'll be there in 3 hours. The Cook County morgue smells of disinfectant and decay, even after all these years. Dr. Patricia Wells, the medical examiner, leads Chun through sterile corridors to a storage room where boxes of evidence from old cases line metal shelves. John Doe 83 to 47, Wells says, pulling a file from the records. Found by fishermen in April of 1983, about 6 months after your pilot disappeared. We estimated he'd been in the water for 4 to 6 months, which puts his death right around the time of your incident. Chun examines the photographs of the remains. Lake Michigan's cold water has preserved the body well enough to determine cause of death and approximate age. What kind of impact trauma? Multiple blunt force injuries consistent with high-velocity collision. Fractured ribs, compressed vertebrae, significant head trauma. Classic aircraft crash pattern, but no positive identification. That's where it gets interesting. Wells pulls out an evidence bag containing a waterlogged business card. Bank card aside, we also found this. She produces another bag containing a small metal object. It's a keychain charm, a tiny airplane. Could be coincidence, but Chun studies the charm, her mind racing. What about dental records? We tried to match them to your missing pilot at the time, but his dentist's office had a fire in 1982. All records were destroyed, just 2 weeks before your pilot disappeared. The coincidences are piling up, but Chun knows coincidences can be manufactured. DNA? This was 1983, remember? DNA analysis wasn't available then. But we preserved tissue sample standard procedure for John Doe's. We could run modern DNA tests now if you can find something for comparison. Chun makes notes furiously. If the body is David Kessler, it changes everything about the case. Instead of a carefully planned disappearance, it becomes a genuine tragedy. But it also raises new questions. How did David's body end up in Lake Michigan when his plane disappeared over central Illinois farmland? As she drives back toward Millfield, Chun's mind works through the possibilities. Perhaps David survived the initial crash, but was injured, wandering in a daze until he somehow reached the lake. Or maybe someone found his body at the crash site and moved it to throw off the investigation. But the most disturbing possibility is that David Kessler was murdered, and both the planted aircraft debris and the body in Lake Michigan are part of an elaborate cover-up orchestrated by someone with access to his personal effects and detailed knowledge of his flight plans. Chun's phone rings as she passes, a sign welcoming her back to Millfield County. It's Bill Kowalski, and his voice carries an excitement she hasn't heard before. Agent Chun, you need to get back here. I'm out checking my north field, The one I just bought from the Henderson place, and my plow just hit something big buried in the ground, something metal. Bill Kowalski's John Deere tractor sits motionless in the middle of the freshly turned field, its plow blades twisted at an unnatural angle. Dark earth spreads in neat furrows behind the machine, but one row ends abruptly where the implement struck something solid enough to stop 8 tons of farming equipment. Agent Chun arrives as the afternoon sun casts long shadows across the Illinois farmland. She's been chasing leads in the David Kessler case for 18 years, but her heart hasn't raced like this since those first days in 1982. Kowalski stands beside his damaged plow, pointing to a gouge in the metal where it made contact with whatever lies buried beneath. Been farming this ground for 43 years, he says, his voice tight with excitement and apprehension. Never hit anything like this. The way it grabbed the plow nearly tore the whole assembly off the tractor. Chun kneels beside the disturbed earth, brushing away loose soil with her hands. 3 feet down, something metallic glints in the late afternoon light. She runs her fingers along the smooth surface, feeling the distinctive texture of aircraft. Aluminum. This isn't debris, she whispers. This is structure. The implications hit both of them simultaneously. The scattered fragments found 18 years ago were never planted evidence to cover up an escape. They were pieces torn away during impact, scattered by the force of a small aircraft, burying itself deep in soft farmland. Chun calls for the state police forensics team and the Cook County Medical Examiner's office. By evening, portable floodlights illuminate the field as a careful excavation begins. What they uncover over the next 6 hours challenges everything. Investigators thought they knew about David Kessler's disappearance. The Cessna 172 sits nose down in the earth at a 60-degree angle, buried to its cabin windows. The impact drove the aircraft nearly 8 feet deep into what was once marshland. Before decades of farming and soil accumulation covered the crash site completely. The propeller is twisted into spirals of metal. The engine cowling crumpled like paper. Dr. Wells arrives from Chicago with her forensics team as they begin the delicate process of excavating around the fuselage. This explains the trauma patterns. On our John Doe, she tells Chun. High-angle impact, probably at low speed. The plane pancaked into soft ground. But how did the body end up in Lake Michigan? Maybe it didn't start there. As the excavation continues, the mystery deepens. The aircraft's cabin is partially crushed, but intact enough to examine. Inside, investigators find personal items that confirm this is indeed David Kessler's Cessna, his flight bag, aviation charts marked with his intended route, and a thermos still containing the remnants of what was once coffee. But they don't find David. The pilot's seat is empty, though streaked with what appears to be dried blood. The cabin door hangs open, twisted on its hinges by impact forces. Whoever was flying this aircraft either walked away from the crash or was removed from it. Chun studies the scene with growing confusion. The blood evidence suggests David was injured in the crash, possibly severely. But where did he go from here? The nearest road is 2 miles away across farmland that was heavily cultivated even in 1982. An injured pilot couldn't have walked far without being noticed. Agent Chun, one of the forensics technicians, calls from beside the aircraft's baggage compartment. You need to see this. The rear compartment, designed to hold luggage and equipment, has been torn open by the impact. But instead of personal belongings, it's packed with something unexpected. Bundles of cash still wrapped in bank bands. Even after 18 years underground, the money is remarkably preserved in waterproof bags. Dr. Wells counts the bundles under the floodlights. Roughly $250,000, she announces. Still here. Chun stares at the money that was supposed to fund David's new life in South America. If he survived the crash and walked away, why didn't he take his escape fund? If someone else removed his body from the wreckage, why didn't they take the cash? As dawn breaks over the Illinois farmland, more questions emerge from the excavation. The aircraft's radio equipment shows signs of recent use, the microphone cord stretched as if someone had been transmitting up until the moment of impact. But the engine examination reveals catastrophic failure of the crankshaft, not the kind of mechanical problem a pilot could have anticipated or prepared for. Most puzzling of all is the discovery of a second set of clothing in the cabin, a woman's jacket and purse wedged under the passenger seat. The purse contains identification for someone named Lisa Hartwell, a name not connected to David Kessler in any of the FBI's background investigations. Chun runs the name through federal databases while the excavation team carefully removes evidence from the buried aircraft. Lisa Hartwell was reported missing from Chicago on September 16, 1982, one day after David's disappearance. She was 26 years old, worked as a bank teller, and was last seen leaving her apartment with a small suitcase. The connection becomes clearer when Chun cross-references employment records. Lisa Hartwell worked at Chicago First National Bank, a sister institution to David's employer in Millfield. More significantly, phone records show multiple calls between David's apartment and Lisa's number in the weeks before their disappearance. They were running away together, Chun realizes, speaking the words aloud as the pieces fall into place. David wasn't flying to a business meeting, he was picking up his girlfriend. The passenger seat wasn't empty when this plane went down. But that revelation only deepens the central mystery. If both David and Lisa were aboard the aircraft when it crashed, where are their bodies? The blood evidence suggests at least one of them was injured, possibly fatally. Yet the Cook County John Doe doesn't match Lisa's description, and remains found in Lake Michigan. As the morning sun rises higher, casting new light across the excavation site, Chun notices something that makes her blood run cold. Fresh tire tracks lead across the field to within 50 yards of where the aircraft was buried. The tracks are recent, made within the past few days. Long after Kowalski's farming equipment had worked this area, someone else has been here. Someone who knew exactly where to look, and that someone may have been watching when Kowalski's plow finally struck the buried Cessna, waiting to see if 18 years of secrets would finally come to light. The tire tracks lead Agent Chun across 2 fields and a gravel road before disappearing onto the paved county highway. She photographs the treads, noting the distinctive wear pattern of high-performance tires, not the kind typically found on farm equipment or local vehicles. Someone with resources and planning has been monitoring this excavation site. Chun returns to find the forensics team making another disturbing discovery. Hidden beneath the Cessna's instrument panel, they've uncovered a small electronic device that clearly doesn't belong to 1982 aviation technology. The black plastic housing contains circuitry and what appears to be a GPS transmitter. This is modern equipment, Dr. Wells confirms, turning the device over in her gloved hands. Maybe 5 years old at most. Someone's been tracking this wreck, but how did they know where to look? Chun asks. The aircraft has been buried for 18 years. The answer comes from an unexpected source. Bill Kowalski approaches the excavation site carrying a manila envelope, his face pale with concern. Agent Chun, I found something in my father's papers after he passed last year. Something I should have given you a long time ago. Inside the envelope is a letter dated September 20th, 1982, 5 days after David Kessler's disappearance. The handwriting is shaky, that of an elderly man under stress. To whom it may concern, I witnessed the aircraft accident on my property on September 15th, 1982. The plane came down in the North Marsh, but I was afraid to report it because of what I saw afterward. A black sedan arrived within hours. 2 men in suits removed something from the wreckage and drove away. They saw me watching and told me to keep quiet if I knew what was good for my family. I have been silent for 5 days, but my conscience won't let me stay silent forever. If Something happens to me. Look for the plane in the deep part of the marsh where the ground is soft. Herman Kowalskichin stares at the letter, her mind racing. Your father witnessed the crash? And never told anyone, Bill says quietly. I found this letter with his will, along with instructions to give it to authorities if anyone ever came looking for the plane. Dad died 3 years ago, took the secret with him. Why didn't he report it at the time? You didn't know my father. He came from the old country, didn't trust authorities. And after those men threatened him, double quotes, Bill shrugs helplessly. He was scared, we all were. The letter explains why the initial search failed to locate the aircraft. Herman Kowalski's marshland was exactly where the Cessna came down, but he deliberately misdirected search teams away from the area. For 18 years, the buried aircraft remained his family's terrifying secret, but it doesn't explain who the men in the black sedan were or what they removed from the wreckage. Chun's phone rings as she processes this revelation. Detective Jake Morrison's voice carries an urgency that makes her stomach tighten. Agent Chun, we've got a problem. Someone broke into the Cook County morgue last night. What did they take? That's the thing, they didn't take anything. They were looking for something specific. The John Doe evidence room was ransacked, but all our 1983 cases are still there. However, someone accessed the computer system and deleted digital files related to John Doe 83 to 47. Chun closes her eyes, feeling the familiar sensation of a case spiraling beyond her control. The same people who've been monitoring this site. Gets worse. We ran those tire tracks you photographed through our database. The tread pattern matches vehicles registered to Blackwood Security Services, a private military contractor based out of Chicago. The name sends a chill through Chun. Blackwood Security has connections to federal agencies and corporate clients who prefer to operate outside normal law enforcement channels. If they're involved in the David Kessler case, it suggests forces far more powerful than local bank embezzlement. As if summoned by her thoughts, 2 black SUVs appear on the county road bordering Kowalski's farm. They drive slowly, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun like dead eyes. The vehicles stop just long enough for their occupants to observe the excavation site, then continue north toward town. Chun calls for additional security, but she knows it's a gesture more than a solution. If Blackwood Security wants access to this crash site, local law enforcement won't be able to stop them indefinitely. The forensics team works through the night under portable floodlights, racing to document everything before external forces can interfere. What they discover in the aircraft's avionics bay changes the entire nature of the investigation. Hidden behind the radio equipment, they find a small metal briefcase that somehow survived both the crash and 18 years underground. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, are documents that make Chun's blood run cold. Bank routing numbers for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Corporate registration papers for shell companies in Panama. Most damning of all, a list of names prominent businessmen, politicians, and law enforcement officials with dollar amounts written beside each entry. This isn't embezzlement, Chun whispers, studying the documents under magnification. This is money laundering. Industrial scale. Dr. Wells examines the papers more closely. Look at these dates. The transactions span 3 years, ending just days before Kessler's disappearance. Someone was using the bank as a conduit for washing massive amounts of illegal money. The amounts stagger Chun. Individual transactions of $50,000 to $200,000, occurring weekly for over 3 years. The total money flow approaches $50 million, enough to justify killing anyone who threatened to expose the operation. David Kessler wasn't running away with embezzled funds, Chun realizes. He was running away with evidence of a money laundering conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of state and federal government. As dawn approaches, Chun faces a terrible reality. The David Kessler case has evolved from a missing person investigation into something that threatens powerful people who've spent 18 years believing their secrets were buried along with the evidence, and those people have been watching, waiting for exactly this moment. Her phone buzzes with a text message from an unknown number. Agent Chun, you have 24 hours to end this investigation and bury what you found. Consider this your only warning. Standing in the floodlit cornfield, surrounded by the excavated remains of secrets that powerful people died to protect, Chun knows that the real danger in the David Kessler case is just beginning. Agent Chun seals the money laundering documents in evidence bags with hands that tremble slightly despite her years of experience. The scope of the conspiracy outlined in David Kessler's hidden briefcase extends far beyond anything she's encountered, a web of corruption involving banks, politicians, and federal agencies that reaches back decades. She calls her supervisor in Chicago, but the conversation goes cold when she mentions Blackwood Security and the offshore accounts. Agent Chun, Director Walsh says carefully, you're operating outside your jurisdiction on an 18-year-old case. Perhaps it's time to wrap up and file your final report. The dismissal is too quick, too convenient. Chun realizes with growing dread that the corruption David Kessler discovered may have infiltrated the very agency she works for. Dr. Wells appears at her shoulder as Chun ends the call. We've got the cabin completely excavated now. There's something else you need to see. Hidden beneath the pilot's seat, forensics has uncovered David Kessler's flight bag leather worn smooth by years of use. Inside, along with aviation charts and routine pilot equipment, they find a microcassette recorder containing what may be David's final message. Chun plays the tape on a portable recorder while standing beside the excavated Cessna. David's voice emerges from the small speaker, distorted by 18 years underground, but unmistakably desperate. If anyone finds this recording, my name is David Kessler, and I'm about to expose the biggest money laundering operation in Illinois history. The people involved. They killed Lisa when she tried to back out. They're going to kill me too, but I have evidence that can bring them down. The flight today isn't an escape, it's a dead man switch. If I don't make it to Chicago to deliver these documents to the FBI, copies will be released to every major newspaper in the country. The recording crackles with static before David's voice returns, more strained. Lisa didn't deserve this. She was just trying to help me gather evidence, and they murdered her for it. If you find my plane, look for the John Doe pulled from Lake Michigan in 1983. That's Lisa Hartwell. They dumped her body to make it look like she drowned accidentally. Chun's mind reels. The body in Lake Michigan wasn't David Kessler, it was Lisa Hartwell, his co-conspirator in exposing the money laundering operation. But the medical examiner identified the remains as male, with injuries consistent with aircraft impact trauma. Dr. Wells seems to read her thoughts. Water decomposition and lack of soft tissue can make gender identification difficult, especially in 1983. We were working with limited technology and may have made assumptions based on the aircraft crash context. The recording continues. I'm carrying evidence that will destroy Harold Morrison, Senator Williams, and at least 6 federal agents who've been facilitating this operation. The offshore accounts trace back to drug money from Colombia, filtered through legitimate businesses and deposited in our bank. They've been using First National as their primary laundering facility for 3 years. Chun pauses the tape, her mind racing. Harold Morrison, the bank president who seemed so devastated by David's embezzlement. But according to this recording, Morrison wasn't a victim of theft. He was the architect of a money laundering conspiracy worth tens of millions of dollars. There's more, David's voice continues from the recorder. Morrison has connections to federal law enforcement through his brother-in-law, Deputy Director Robert Walsh of the FBI Chicago Field Office. Walsh has been protecting the operation by misdirecting investigations and suppressing evidence. Chun's blood turns to ice. Deputy Director Walsh, the same supervisor who just ordered her to end the investigation. The man who's been her mentor for over a decade is directly implicated in the conspiracy David Kessler died trying to expose. The recording crackles one final time. Engines running rough. Lisa's coordinates are written on the back of my pilot's license. They made her death look like an accident, but her body will tell the truth. The briefcase contains account numbers, transaction records, and recorded conversations with Morrison and Walsh. Don't trust anyone in federal law enforcement until you verify they're clean. The corruption goes, static fills the recorder as the tape ends abruptly, cut off by the crash that buried David's evidence for 18 years. Chun stares at the excavated aircraft, finally understanding the full scope of what she's uncovered. David Kessler wasn't an embezzler or a fugitive. He was a whistleblower who discovered that his small-town bank was the center of a massive criminal conspiracy. His escape to Chicago was actually an attempt to deliver evidence to honest federal agents, but the conspiracy's reach extended even into the FBI. Her phone rings. Director Walsh's number appears on the display, but Chun lets it go to voicemail. She can't trust her own agency until she knows who else is compromised. Bill Kowalski approaches as she contemplates her next move. Agent Chun, there's something my father's letter didn't mention. He kept a journal during those years after the crash. Wrote down license plate numbers, descriptions of the men who came to the farm. I found it with the letter. The journal entries paint a picture of systematic intimidation. Beginning days after the crash, men in dark suits visited the Kowalski farm regularly for months, ensuring Herman's silence through a combination of threats and payments. The license plates trace back to rental cars paid for by shell companies, the same money laundering network David Kessler died exposing. Most chilling are Herman's final entries, dated just weeks before his death 3 years ago. They're back. Different faces, same suits. Asking about the marsh, about what I saw. Paid me $10,000 to keep quiet, but I think they're planning something. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Chun realizes that Herman Kowalski's death may not have been natural causes. But timing 3 years ago, when David Kessler's case was being transferred to cold case status, suggests someone was tying up loose ends. As evening approaches, the black SUVs return to the county road. This time they don't simply observe armed men in tactical gear emerge from the vehicles and begin advancing across the field toward the excavation site. Chun draws her weapon, knowing it's an inadequate response to the forces arrayed against her. The local police are outgunned and possibly compromised. The FBI is infiltrated by the very conspiracy she's investigating. And the evidence that could expose the truth lies scattered around an excavated aircraft in the middle of an Illinois cornfield. Dr. Wells grabs the briefcase containing David's documents. There's a back road through the Kowalski property. We can reach the county sheriff's office if we move now. But as they prepare to flee, Chun realizes the futility of their situation. The conspiracy David Kessler discovered has had 18 years to consolidate power and eliminate threats. Running will only delay the inevitable. Instead, she makes a decision that will either save her life or end it. She pulls out her phone and dials a number she's memorized, but never used, the direct line to the Washington Post's investigative desk. "This is FBI agent Sarah Chun," she says as armed men cross the fence line of Kowalski's farm. "I have evidence of a federal conspiracy involving money laundering, murder, and corruption at the highest levels. If I don't check in with you every hour for the next 24 hours, publish everything I'm about to send you." The armed men from Blackwood Security advance methodically across the cornfield, their tactical formation suggesting military training and lethal intent. Agent Chun crouches behind the excavated Cessna, her phone camera recording everything as she uploads David Kessler's evidence to the Washington Post's secure server. "This is Sarah Chun, Badge number 4782, she speaks rapidly. Into her phone. I'm transmitting documents proving a money laundering conspiracy involving Deputy Director Robert Walsh, Senator Williams, and others. If this transmission stops, assume I've been silenced. Dr. Wells clutches the metal briefcase containing the original documents, her medical examiner training never having prepared her for armed confrontation. Bill Kowalski stands frozen beside his damaged tractor, watching his family's decades-old nightmare finally catch up with them. The lead operative raises his hand, signaling his team to halt 50 yards from the crash site. He removes his tactical helmet, revealing a face Chun recognizes from federal law enforcement briefings. Marcus Stone, former Delta Force operator turned private security contractor. Agent Chun, Stone calls across the field, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. You're interfering with a classified federal operation. Stand down and surrender any materials you've removed from that aircraft. What? Classification? Chun shouts back, her weapon trained on Stone despite knowing the futility of the gesture. This is a crime scene investigation into an 18-year-old missing person case. That case was classified under national security provisions in 1983. The aircraft contains materials relevant to ongoing intelligence operations. Chun realizes they're creating a post hoc justification for seizing David's evidence. The national security claim will provide legal cover for suppressing the money laundering documents, protecting the conspiracy that David Kessler died trying to expose. Her phone buzzes with an incoming call from Director Walsh. She puts it on speaker, gambling that recording their conversation might provide additional evidence. Sarah, you need to end this investigation immediately. Walsh's voice carries a mixture of authority and desperation. You're in possession of classified materials that threaten ongoing federal operations. What operations, Director? Money laundering. For Colombian drug cartels? The silence that follows tells Chun everything she needs to know. Walsh's involvement isn't recent. He's been protecting this conspiracy for decades. You don't understand the bigger picture, Walsh finally responds. The money laundering was a controlled operation. We were tracking cartel finances, identifying networks. David Kessler threatened to expose an investigation that took years to establish. By murdering him and his girlfriend, David Kessler died in an aircraft accident. Any other interpretation is speculation, but Chun knows the truth now. The controlled operation story is damage control, a way to frame criminal conspiracy as legitimate law enforcement. David's evidence proves the money wasn't being tracked, it was being stolen, with federal agents and politicians taking cuts from the cartel's laundered funds. Stone's team begins advancing again, using the distraction of the phone call to close the distance. Chun realizes she has perhaps 30 seconds before they're in position to overwhelm her. Dr. Wells, she whispers urgently, take the briefcase and run for the tree line. Get to the sheriff's office and Town Sheriff Martinez is clean. I've verified his background. What about you? Someone needs to delay them long enough for you to escape. But before Dr. Wells can move, the situation changes dramatically. The sound of approaching helicopters fills the air, not the military aircraft Chun expects, but news helicopters bearing the logos of major television networks. Her gambit with the Washington Post has worked faster than anticipated. Within minutes of receiving David's evidence, the newspaper contacted network news partners, and the story of a buried aircraft containing evidence of federal corruption has exploded across the media landscape. Stone's tactical advantage evaporates as camera crews document his every move. Whatever legal justification Blackwood Security might have for seizing evidence, they can't execute it on live television without triggering a national scandal. Stone speaks into his radio, his frustration evident even from a distance. After several tense minutes, he signals his team to withdraw. The black SUVs retreat to the county road, their occupants undoubtedly regrouping for a different approach. But Chun knows this is only a temporary reprieve. The forces that silence David Kessler won't be deterred by media attention. They'll simply adapt their strategy. Her phone rings again, this time displaying a number she doesn't recognize. The voice that answers is elderly but sharp, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Agent Chun, this is Senator Patricia Hawthorne, Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. I've been briefed on your investigation by the Washington Post. We need to talk. Chun recognizes the name. Hawthorne has built a reputation as one of the few senators willing to challenge intelligence agency overreach. If anyone in Washington can protect David's evidence from suppression, it's her. Senator, the evidence I've uncovered implicates federal agents in money laundering and murder. I'm not sure who can be trusted. Agent Chun, 30 minutes ago I received a classified briefing claiming you've compromised a long-term counterintelligence operation. Someone is working very hard to discredit you before your evidence reaches Congress. The speed of the damage control efforts confirms Chun's worst fears. The conspiracy David Kessler discovered has tentacles reaching into the highest levels of government, with enough advance warning to mount a coordinated defense. Senator, David Kessler wasn't a bank embezzler or a fugitive. He was a whistleblower who died trying to expose corruption that reaches into federal law enforcement. The evidence is documented in recordings and financial records that have been authenticated by multiple sources. Can you guarantee the safety of that evidence until my committee can take possession? Chun looks around the cornfield where news crews are setting up cameras and reporters are broadcasting live updates. The media attention provides some protection, but she knows it won't last. Once the news cycle moves on, the forces aligned against her will resume their efforts to suppress David's evidence. I'll do my best, Senator. But the people responsible for this conspiracy have been protecting their secrets for 18 years. They won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens them. As if to emphasize her point, Chun notices movement in the tree line beyond the excavation site. Men with long-range optics are positioning themselves for surveillance or worse. The temporary protection provided by media coverage is already beginning to erode. Dr. Wells clutches the briefcase tighter as more black vehicles appear on distant roads, taking up positions around the Kowalski farm. Whatever happens next, Chun realizes, will determine whether David Kessler's 18-year-old evidence finally brings justice or disappears forever, along with anyone who's seen it. The standoff at Kowalski's farm extends through the night as federal marshals arrive to secure the crash site, pending a congressional investigation. Senator Hawthorne's intervention has created a buffer zone of legal protection, but Chun knows it's fragile and temporary. The forces that killed David Kessler won't be deterred by political maneuvering. In the harsh glare of television lights, Dr. Wells carefully inventories every piece of evidence recovered from the buried Cessna. The briefcase contents are photographed and documented under the supervision of multiple agencies, ensuring no single entity can suppress or alter the findings. Chun's phone buzzes with updates from the Washington Post investigation, working through the night. Their forensic accountants have traced the offshore accounts detailed in David's documents. The money trail leads to a network of shell companies that laundered over $200 million between 1979 and 1982, far exceeding anything the FBI task force initially suspected. Agent Chun. A new voice interrupts her thoughts. She turns to find Assistant Director Jennifer Morrison, no relation to the corrupt bank president, approaching with a team of internal affairs investigators. Morrison's reputation for integrity is legendary within the Bureau, making her the ideal choice to investigate federal corruption. Assistant Director, I wasn't expecting. Senator Hawthorne called me personally 2 hours ago. She's invoking congressional oversight to ensure this investigation proceeds without interference. Morrison's steely gaze sweeps across the excavation site. Tell me everything, and don't leave out details that might implicate federal personnel. Over the next hour, Chun recounts the entire investigation while Morrison's team documents her statements. The assistant director's expression grows increasingly grim as the scope of the conspiracy becomes clear. Deputy Director Walsh has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, Morrison reveals. We've also secured Harold Morrison, the bank president, not me, and he's agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. The cooperation comes with a devastating revelation. Harold Morrison's confession, recorded just hours earlier, confirms David Kessler's worst suspicions about the money laundering operation's reach. It started small, Morrison admitted to federal investigators. A few thousand here and there, looking the other way when certain deposits didn't quite add up. But the cartel money kept growing, and Walsh convinced me we were serving a larger purpose tracking criminal finances for federal prosecutions that never seemed to materialize. By 1982, Morrison realized he was trapped in a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond his small-town bank. When David Kessler began asking questions about dormant account irregularities, Morrison panicked and contacted his FBI handler, Deputy Director Walsh. Walsh told me Kessler was getting too close to exposing the operation. Morrison's recorded confession continues. He said they'd handle it quietly, just transfer him somewhere else. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. But the conspiracy had evolved beyond Morrison's control. When David recruited Lisa Hartwell to help document the money laundering evidence, both became threats that Walsh and his associates couldn't allow to survive. Chun pieces together the final tragedy from Morrison's confession and David's own recorded testimony. Lisa Hartwell was murdered first, probably drowned in Lake Michigan, to simulate an accidental death. Her body was later identified as male due to decomposition and investigative bias toward finding David Kessler. David, unaware of Lisa's fate, proceeded with his plan to fly to Chicago and deliver evidence to honest federal agents. But Walsh's network had anticipated his move. The engine failure that brought down David's Cessna wasn't mechanical, it was sabotage, triggered remotely once the aircraft was over the predetermined crash site. They needed his death to look accidental, Chun realizes aloud. But they also needed to recover the evidence he was carrying. That's why the men in suits arrived at Kowalski's farm so quickly. They knew exactly where the plane would go down. Morrison nods grimly. Harold Morrison's confession includes details about the sabotage device. Walsh's people had access to David's aircraft during routine maintenance. They installed a radio-controlled device that could disable the engine on command. The sophisticated planning involved in David's murder reveals the conspiracy's true scope. This wasn't a spontaneous cover-up by corrupt local officials. It was a coordinated assassination carried out by federal agents to protect a massive criminal enterprise. As dawn breaks over the Illinois farmland, Chun receives word that arrests are beginning across multiple states. Senator Williams has been taken into custody at his Georgetown residence. 3 additional FBI agents have been arrested for conspiracy and money laundering. Corporate executives linked to the shell companies are being rounded up by federal marshals, but the victory feels incomplete. Too many questions remain unanswered. Too many bodies left in the wake of a conspiracy that should have been exposed. 18 years ago, Dr. Wells approaches with final results from the aircraft examination. We found something else in the cabin. Debris, she says quietly. A child's stuffed animal, a small teddy bear with a name tag reading, "For Emma, love Daddy." Chun's heart breaks as the full human cost of the conspiracy becomes clear. David Kessler wasn't just a whistleblower who died for his principles. He was a father planning to give his daughter a gift when he returned from what he thought would be a routine flight to Chicago. Does he have family? Chun asks. A daughter, Emma Kessler. She's 26 now, works as a teacher in Wisconsin. She grew up believing her father was a criminal who abandoned her. The cruelest aspect of the conspiracy wasn't just David's murder, it was the character assassination that followed, ensuring his daughter would live with shame instead of pride in her father's courage. Chun makes a mental note to personally deliver David's final recording to Emma, along with proof of his heroism in trying to expose the truth. After 18 years of believing her father was a thief and a coward, Emma Kessler deserves to know he died as a hero. But as Chun surveys the excavation site one final time, she notices the black SUVs are gone from the surrounding roads. Blackwood security has withdrawn, but she knows they're regrouping for a longer-term strategy. The arrests and media coverage have disrupted their immediate plans, but powerful interests remain threatened by David's evidence. The David Kessler case is solved. But Chun realizes the larger fight for justice is just beginning. 3 months later, Emma Kessler sits in Agent Chun's Chicago field office, her hands trembling as she holds the small teddy bear recovered from her father's aircraft. At 26, she carries herself with the quiet strength of someone who's learned to navigate the world without answers until today. "He bought this for me the week before he disappeared," Emma whispers, her voice thick with emotion. "I remember him saying he had a surprise for when he got back from his business trip. For 18 years, I thought he just abandoned." U.S. Chun slides a copy of David's final recording across the desk. "Your father was a hero, Emma. He died trying to expose corruption that could have destroyed thousands of lives. The evidence he gathered has led to over 30 arrests and the recovery of nearly $200 million in laundered money. The vindication has come at tremendous personal cost. Emma's mother died 5 years earlier, never knowing the truth about her husband's disappearance. Emma grew up believing her father was a criminal, carrying that shame through school, relationships, and her own struggles with trust and abandonment. The hardest part," Emma says, clutching the teddy bear, "was the not knowing. People would whisper when they thought I couldn't hear about how my father stole money and ran away. I spent my whole life wondering if I had done something wrong, something that made him want to leave." Chun understands the psychological torture of unanswered questions. Her own 18-year obsession with the case stemmed partly from seeing similar pain in other families of missing persons, the endless wondering, the gradual erosion of hope, the way tragedy reshapes every subsequent relationship. Your father's evidence has exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, Chun explains. Deputy Director Walsh received a life sentence yesterday. Senator Williams was convicted on 14 counts of money laundering and conspiracy. The shell companies your father identified have been dismantled, and their assets returned to victims of the original crimes. But justice for the architects of the conspiracy can't restore the years Emma lost believing her father was a coward. It can't bring back her mother, who died still wondering what drove her husband to embezzlement and abandonment. Some wounds created by deception never fully heal, even when truth finally emerges. Emma plays her father's final recording one more time. Listening to his voice described the evidence he was carrying and his determination to expose the truth. When it ends, she sits in silence for several minutes before speaking again. "I want to do something with this," she says finally. "Set up a foundation or something for families of whistleblowers who get silenced. So many people must go through what we went through, thinking their loved ones were criminals when they were really heroes." Chun nods, recognizing the impulse to transform personal tragedy into purpose. The David Kessler Foundation for Truth and Justice. It has a good sound to it. Outside Chun's office window, Chicago sprawls under an autumn sky, its financial district unknowingly cleaner for David Kessler's sacrifice. The banks and corporations that once facilitated massive money laundering now operate under enhanced scrutiny, their activities monitored by federal agents, who can be trusted to serve justice rather than their own interests. Dr. Wells calls with a final update from the forensic examination. Lisa Hartwell's remains have been positively identified through DNA comparison with her surviving sister. She'll finally receive a proper burial and recognition as a victim of murder rather than accidental drowning. Her family, like Emma, has spent decades believing lies designed to protect a criminal conspiracy. Agent Chun, Wells says over the phone, "We found something else in the aircraft's avionics bay, a letter David wrote to his daughter, sealed in waterproof packaging. It was hidden with the evidence briefcase. The letter arrives by courier an hour later. Emma opens it with hands that shake so violently, Chun has to help steady the pages. David's familiar handwriting covers 3 sheets of notebook paper. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and the truth about why I disappeared has finally come to light. I need you to know that everything I did was to protect innocent people from criminals who were using our bank to steal and hurt others. Know the newspapers will probably say terrible things about me. They might call me a thief or say I ran away from my responsibilities. None of that is true. I stayed and fought because I couldn't live with myself if I let these bad people continue hurting others. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Emma, nothing that happens to me will ever change that. Be proud of who you are, be kind to others, and always remember that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. Your daddy will always be watching over you. All my love." Emma breaks down completely, 18 years of suppressed grief finally finding release. Chun sits quietly beside her, understanding that some pain must be fully experienced before healing can begin. As the afternoon sun sets over Chicago, Chun reflects on the David Kessler case and its broader implications. The corruption exposed by his evidence represents just one network in a larger ecosystem of criminal conspiracy that touches every level of American society. For every David Kessler who finds the courage to speak truth to power, dozens of others remain silent, either from fear or because they're never given the chance to act. The case files stack higher on Chun's desk each year, filled with stories of missing persons whose disappearances may not be what they seem. Some are genuine accidents or voluntary departures, but others, she now knows, are eliminations designed to protect secrets that powerful people will kill to preserve. The David Kessler case taught her that truth has a way of surfacing eventually, no matter how deeply it's buried. But it also taught her that justice delayed is often justice denied for the families left behind, to wonder and grieve and blame themselves for tragedies they could never have prevented. Emma Kessler wipes her eyes and looks up with a determination that mirrors her father's courage 18 years earlier. "Agent Chun, I want to help you with other cases like this. There have to be other families out there living with lies, wondering what really happened to their loved ones." Chun smiles, recognizing the same moral clarity that drove David Kessler to risk everything for the truth. Sometimes justice takes a generation to emerge, passed from parent to child like a sacred trust. Sometimes the dead can only speak through the living who refuse to let their stories be forgotten. In the end, David Kessler's final flight accomplished exactly what he intended. It delivered evidence that brought down a criminal conspiracy and restored honor to his name. The journey took 18 years longer than planned, but truth, like justice, operates on its own timeline. And in a small cemetery in Wisconsin, a new headstone will soon mark David Kessler's grave with words that finally tell his real story. Loving father and American hero, he chose truth over safety.